The Charlotte Ledger Podcast is a member of the Queen City Podcast Network.
This episode of the Charlotte Ledger Podcast is presented by PBS Charlotte's Unspun program, helping you learn what politicians are thinking but not saying. Hosted by former Governor Pat McCrory.
Welcome to the Charlotte Ledger Podcast. I'm Steve Dunn. To find out more about the Charlotte Ledger, visit thecharlotteledger.com. I'm joined today by Jamie Brown, one of the owners of Tonidandel Brown Restaurant Group. Welcome, Jamie.
Thank you, Steve. Glad to be here.
You and your husband, Jeff, are the owners of several restaurants in Charlotte, including Growler's Pourhouse, Haberdish, Supperland, Andalo, and most recently,
You got it. Leluia Hall.
Leluia Hall.
You're not the only one.
Am I the only person who's ever mispronounced the name
Absolutely
of Leluia Hall?
Not.
All right. Well, we're going to talk about all of them, but what I notice about these restaurants is that they're very different from each other. Each one is unique. What's the common thread that runs through them all?
I mean, the biggest common thread is just Jeff and I ourselves. A lot of times you'll see our restaurants kind of pop up in course with what's going on in our lives. So our very, very first restaurant that we opened up in 2009 was really the result of us having gone on a trip overseas. And so we opened up Crepe Cellar, and a lot of people remember that place, but it hasn't been open for many years now. But, you see the same thing with Growler's Pourhouse. That came about because Jeff had become a cicerone here in Charlotte, which is like a sommelier of beer. And so he got very into craft beer. And so we opened up Growler's Pourhouse. On and on it has gone from one concept to the next. Andalo is another good example that came about an Italian concept because Jeff and our 3 children were all in pursuit. This was a 10-year journey of becoming Italian citizens. So they all have their dual citizenship. So bringing about that menu was really a result of us going through that journey as well. So,
well, looking back, you didn't start out. Although you like to play restaurant when you're a kid growing up in Pittsburgh,
that's right.
You didn't set out intending to become a restaurateur. This was something that you just decided to do, and I think it's the sort of thing that a lot of people fantasize about and dream about. But there's something about you and Jeff where you're the kind of people who went ahead and did it. What is that about you, and what was that experience like actually making this fantasy a reality?
Well, I'll tell you what, from the very beginning, it was more Jeff's idea than mine. So whenever things are not so easy, which is quite often in the restaurant business, I'm like, remember, you got us into this. But really, he had a true passion for hospitality. And when we were traveling around overseas, we had done a lot of talking and dreaming about, hey, imagine what if, like, wouldn't it be fun if we could go back to the States and open up our own little restaurant? And we had in mind a creperie and a gastropub type of place where we'd make everything homemade there in the restaurant. And his drive towards hospitality was such a huge part of it. When we came back to the States, there's that big punch in the face where you're back into reality. And, you start thinking about, hey, we've got to pay bills. And, the recession had started to happen.
Now, hold on. When you say you came back to the States, what you're talking about there is that you both had good jobs, career-type jobs, doing what you went to school to do, right?
That's exactly right.
And you decided to quit those jobs and just go traveling and just travel the world for a little while. So you're a certain type of person, both of you, right? You're a good match for each other in that way. You're sort of up for the idea of embracing risk, sort of embracing uncertainty, seeking out experiences in life that are a little bit off the beaten path, like literally in terms of your travels, but also career-wise in terms of following your dreams. What is that about you and Jeff, and what makes you such a good match for each other?
I think you're exactly right. Like, I never would have thought when I was younger that I was like a risky person like that. But I always wanted to have adventure in life. I didn't want to just live a regular job and go to an office every day. And I had started out like that. My very first job was as a document clerk at Moore and Van Allen. So on like the 40th floor of the Bank of America building here in Charlotte. And I laugh because I spent more time on the floor there because I was a filer. I was filing documents, and And I remember thinking about, oh my gosh, is this what people do? Do they just go to a job and do the thing that has to be done, and then they go home and then they get up and do it again? And, I was punching the clock. I was on a chrono system, that was my beginning. And I think I knew right then that, hey, if I could find a different way of going about life and have a life that felt rich and full, even if it wasn't monetarily rich, that it would bring me more joy and more happiness. And even at a young age, I saw that my philosophy on life has changed a lot over my lifetime thus far. But I think somehow in there, I had that small spark of just like not wanting things to be so mundane. And thankfully, I ended up with a partner who was very much the same. And we are so different in the way that we approach life, but I do think we're both open to adventure and doing exciting things and living life to the fullest.
Well, you have that in common, but you also make a great team because you have different strengths and you fulfill different roles within your company. What's your sphere of responsibility, and what part does Jeff take care of?
So where we are separate is that Jeff he runs all of the culinary and operations and finances, which is a tremendous amount of stuff. But we have teammates who are involved in those categories as well. I, on the other hand, do our PR and marketing. So it's a lot of, I let him do his thing, I do my thing in that way. Where we really cross over is in concept development. So when we're creating a new concept, when we're coming up with the name, the feeling, the branding, what we want to bring to life, what ingredients we want to have it come about. Even though I'm not in charge of culinary, I will work with Jeff to make sure that the ingredients that we're sourcing, that the menu items that we're putting on that menu are really telling that brand story. And so I think that's where we really work together well, and having different points of view there allows different, unique, special places to come about.
Where do you see yourselves as being in your journey? And let me frame it this way. You and I are talking. I've just read your book. All right. You've got a book. It's called 11 Tables, A Wild Ride Through Food, Failure, and Figuring It Out by Jamie A. Brown. That's you. And it's essentially, it's like a business memoir. You tell the title 11 Tables, I take it, comes from the original 11 Tables at the Crepe Cellar, which was your first restaurant. And here we are today. And you got a bunch of restaurants. You've got some new stuff coming up. You're at the stage of your career and your company where you're writing a book. Okay. So where does it go from here?
I don't totally know, Steve. But I do think Jeff and I both see growth ahead for us. And we don't entirely know what that looks like. But I think a lot of times we try to take time every year and probably every 6 months to look at, hey, where are we trying to go? What is the vision? Are we still on track with where we want to go? And, I try to take every day this might sound really particular, but every day I try to approach with a list, and I make sure that there are big things and small things on that list. Am I taking care of the little things that need to be tended to, like children need to get to school? But am I also looking at those bigger things of where are we trying to go? I think we've really enjoyed adding a media mix to what we do. We've got, the book 11 Tables that came out in January. We're fortunate to be a part of a new public television series called Fork and Hammer. That's been a lot of fun. We've launched our own podcast called Jeff and Jamie Feed, which is all things F&B from a ton of different perspectives. And I think we're having fun with a lot of that. And we're really hoping that it continues to build on our restaurant brands as well. And, for us as restaurant owners, we don't just go out there and get a business loan. People don't give people business loans for a restaurant. So we have to find investors. And so if we're doing a great job and being great stewards of the restaurants that we have and creating a platform, then investors are more willing and more eager to invest with us. We can get, better opportunities or earlier looks at spaces that might be interesting. And so those things all kind of work together in an ecosystem.
Well, one of my favorite things about the book is the detail that you go into about each of the businesses and sort of how they came about, how you developed the concept, but then also the detail regarding execution. I think it could be a useful resource for somebody who's thinking about following in your footsteps, but not necessarily to copy what you've done, but just the level at which you have to think about things. For example, the butter knives are at a 45-degree angle on the plate at Andalo, right? And the tables are 18 and a half inches from the back of the seat at Supperland, right? And this is the sort of thing where there is an optimal way to do it, and there's a way to do it that is the correct expression of your vision, and you are focused on expressing your vision at a level of detail that's really granular. Is that a part of your secret sauce that makes it work?
For sure. And it's setting those constructs up for your team. Like if you can get everything set up in place, then your managers, assistant managers, shift leads are all operating in that same direction. And don't get me wrong, it is not perfect. You can imagine like being in a restaurant business where you've got hundreds of people coming in there, and our servers, somebody might have a bad day, or something's happened at home, or someone needs to leave a while. There's so many different things that can happen. But I think setting up those constructs is a huge part. And also, anytime we go to visit one of the restaurants, we are taking meticulous notes down to, can we please make sure our servers at Supperland are setting down the plates in the proper direction? Because they all have artwork on them, and we want them set down in a certain way. And the idea is that it's not to be so particular. It's more about, let's stay true to what we're doing and let's have discipline so that everything else can shine. If we have like these basic constructs of this is how the napkins go on the table, then everything else can kind of come to life around that. And I think that's one of the biggest things we can do, is to show almost meticulous attention towards anything that we're working on. And we're seeing that right now as we're building out the Leeper and Wyatt building, which is the building we physically picked up and transported next to our other concept, Leluia Hall, in historic Dilworth. Not a feat I would suggest doing for the faint of heart, but that the meticulous details that we're working on right now will not spring to life for another year and some when we go to open. And when we go to open, all those things start to come together. And if our team sees how much care and tenderness and thought was put into what we're creating, they will take better care of it too.
The physical spaces of your restaurants is a big part of the experience of being there. And it's a part of how you formulate the concept on the front end. You spend a lot of time driving around town, just looking and seeing, who's who and what's what and where things are. How, and they're unique places. Like Supperland is a church in Plaza Midwood. You've got multiple ventures in the Nodon neighborhood. And of course, you're in Dilworth as well, notwithstanding your one-time decision that you would never try to open a restaurant in Dilworth, because Dilworth residents are very passionate about Dilworth. And they got very pro and con, whatever might be going on there. How does your physical location affect your vision for the concept, and how does your vision for the concept give life to a physical location that had a life before you came along?
Well, to date, we've really focused on going into older spaces that I think what we love is like the idea of having character already there. Sometimes we laugh that maybe we're not so good at our jobs. We need there to be character already inherently in the space. So that helps a lot. But we don't typically have an idea for our restaurant concept until we have a space secured. So I think it's kind of a backwards way of going about it, wherein I think a lot of people who go into the restaurant businesses, and chefs particularly, because they have a type of cuisine that they want to make and they have recipes that they want to make in this restaurant. And so they're looking for a space. Usually for us, the space comes to us in a weird way, like a friend reaches out or that we hear about it and we're like, oh, wow, that's beautiful. We would love to check that out. And then we go into the space and we start looking into the history and what had been there before and see what kind of stories we can potentially tell and how we could potentially bring a concept to life. So it is a little bit of a backwards approach, I think, but it does allow us to create this layered storytelling in a brand, in a restaurant experience that maybe we wouldn't otherwise be able to do. Now, I say to date because we have our eyes open for some different concepts that we're thinking of, which means maybe it doesn't have to be in such a special location. It could be in something that's more of a white box in the bottom of an apartment building type of thing. We're not quite there yet, but we're trying to stay open to the idea of concepts that could be repeatable.
We'll be right back to the conversation, but first, This episode of the Charlotte Ledger podcast is presented by PBS Charlotte's Unspun program, discussing what politicians are thinking but not saying.
Well, one of the things that happens when you go into business is you quickly realize that it's not just about you. You are important and you make things happen, but you immediately surround yourself with a team of people. And I wonder what it's been like for you to create a company and to create spaces within which your team can come into themselves and fulfill their own potential. I mean, and you've had this experience over the years of seeing folks really become passionate and grow as people. What's that like for you?
I think that's one of my favorite parts of the job, for sure. We've got 330 people on our team, but it's probably about 30 people who have been there for a number of years, I'll say, anywhere from 2 to 5 years. And within that group, there's probably another core 10 people who have, executive chefs and managers and people in upper management who are overseeing that are really helping to guide the ship and make sure the quality stays there. And they're really proud of what they do. And I think one of the best things that we can do as leaders of this company is to make sure we continue to create new concepts so that our team has places to grow. Because you can imagine an executive chef, if there's a sous chef who's really talented, there's nowhere for that sous chef to go unless the executive chef leaves. So we think part of the reason we've been able to retain a lot of our team is because we've created that pipeline of growth. And so they can see, hey, there's something on the horizon I can work toward. Maybe I'll be considered for that, and they can keep going up. But I think the ability to offer jobs that can actually pay people's bills, like some of our servers make 70 grand or more. We've got a number of people who make more than that on our team. And for them to be able to have those opportunities brings me so much joy. They can support a family. We, in fact, now that we've gotten a little bit more seasoned, we'll say, we have children coming into work for us staff's children who are now 15, 16, 17 years old or older, and they're now working in the kitchens or as hosts. And it brings us a lot of joy.
Well, one of the things that you've done is make a commitment to paying your employees a living wage. That was a choice that you made along the way, and it's a choice that you make on an ongoing basis because living wage, even what that is, continues to change. And it's not a decision that everyone makes, and it's not a decision that's easy to make because you're in a difficult business, a competitive business with relatively low margins on your best day. And your labor costs cut right into that. But you've made that choice, you've made that commitment, and you must consider it good business for you. How is that working out?
Well, so yes, the first time we did that was in 2019. Okay. And we brought everybody up to a living wage just from our standpoint of feeling like we were taking care of the people who were taking care of our places. It was a really big move to do. And then, of course, the next year, COVID hit and we had to let everybody go. So it's been, an up and down road, just figuring that out.
Well, one of the things that you do, in addition to paying a living wage, another way that you've structured the service in your restaurant group is with tip pooling. And so as opposed to individual servers collecting their own tips, it all goes into a pool at the end of the evening. And the idea there is that it encourages everybody to work as a team.
You get people working together. You get people running food to the table. You get people clearing tables that aren't theirs, or people form relationships so that they can do a better job and keep tips high for everybody. And to this point, we don't see any reason why we'd ever switch back.
Well, you're very open in the book about your personal journey. You talk about the experience of having children at the same time that you're building a career, and at the same time you're getting into restaurants. You're very open about your marriage and your relationship with Jeff, including such moments along the way in which he was getting on your nerves and things were tough. And you're very open about your experience of anxiety and having panic attacks and challenges with mental health, and how that ultimately you determined was related to your diet. And in perhaps one of the great ironies of life, you find yourself in a situation where, as we sit here today, you have a very strict diet, a very unusual diet, and one that precludes you from enjoying a lot of the dishes at your restaurant. I wonder what that's been like for you. If you feel as though, I'm sure in some sense you feel better because you're not experiencing the same symptoms you were previously, but it must also be accompanied by a sense of loss. And I just wonder how that's been.
Yeah, so it's been about 7.5 years that I began this food journey, I'll say. I had suffered for about a year, off and on with some issues with very severe depression and then very severe anxiety and panic attacks. I was diagnosed with a generalized anxiety disorder and panic disorder, which to people who have never experienced this, I think it's just really hard to understand. A lot of people are just like, just go for a run, listen to happy music, read some good quotes. Like, it is not like that. It is something that is very uncontrollable. And there's an imbalance in the system. And so much more science has come out since then about the gut health and how there's the gut-brain connection, and what you're feeding yourself is impacting the bacterial imbalance in your body. And that is communicating up the vagus nerve into your brain and causing different symptoms. And I am grateful that I was able to, I'll say, stumble upon these ideas actually in the middle of the night. I shot out of bed. It was 2:00 in the morning, and here I had been suffering from panic attacks multiple times a day. A lot of times I wasn't even able to leave the house. And, it was to the point where Jeff couldn't even leave me with the kids for a weekend when he was going away. And I see all of those issues now as a complete gift. It turned my life around. I think I would have been somebody who would just intermittently or perhaps all the time be suffering with depression and anxiety. And now that I know the answers and I know what works for my body, and I've had 7.5 years to test, different foods on my body, I know what works. I do well with a low FODMAP diet is what it's called. And one where I eat very little sugar and carbs. I eat dairy-free, gluten-free, and I don't eat grains either. So there's a lot of things I don't eat, but I think it's...
But you found a lot of ways to sort of creatively sort of reconstruct some delicious things, right?
Well, you're exactly right. You're exactly right. That's why it's been a gift. It has made me look at food in a totally different way. And, it's hard for people who have to eat restrictive diets to go into a restaurant and be able to experience it like everybody else, because you're thinking, what can I eat? What do I feel safe eating? Oh, I have to modify everything here. And so if we can set them up with menu items that are already, hey, if you want to have the Brussels sprouts and you don't want cheese and you don't want nuts on them, that's fine. We actually go to the trouble of, in the menu making process, so this is, as we're developing a concept, we will go through the steps of creating those items to make sure that we can easily remove high allergen items. So our Brussels sprouts, for instance, would be cooked in just olive oil until the very end. They'd be dressed with butter and Parmesan and a toasted almond. So knowing that the steps are happening back in the kitchen allows us to be able to modify those items really easily.
The tagline on your book, the book is called 11 Tables, and then it's followed by the line, a wild ride through food, failure, and figuring it out. And I got you with wild ride, and I got you with food and figuring it out. But I'm wondering about failure. On some level, there's not a lot of failure, right? You've the restaurants are doing pretty well. You have most restaurants that open close,
yes.
And there's just one of them, right? You have opened several, and they're not all still open, but they all could still be open, and they're all doing their thing. What do you consider failures along the way, and what have you taken from them?
I think that's a great question, and I think failure is such a funny thing, because I think failure is really something that we feel in a moment. And it's not something in a life course that really is failure. So to us, in the moment, it felt like failure when we tried to open up a restaurant on East Boulevard and it punched us in the face and we couldn't do it.
The Dilworth people are very passionate.
It's okay. I'm one of those Dilworth people.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
But it's okay. And you know what? I really believe they're just trying to make this city better and livable and wonderful, just like we all are. We're just coming at it from different ways. So I really don't point fingers at them, but it was still a failure to us, especially as a young couple, to lose that opportunity. We also had tried to open up a concept over in South End. We spent a year and a half of work on that, probably about $80,000 or so. And
Quite memorably, you made a model of the place out of Legos.
that's right.
You were ready. You had it all figured out, but then
Sure
you
did.
lost the space.
We did.
Somebody
We
else
would-
came along and was paying more.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly right. And the game of business is just, it's harsh, it's unforgiving. And so to that point, that was failure. I think, when I look back at Crepe Cellar and us closing that, we closed that down in 2021, or at the end of 2021. That felt like failure at the time because we had to close something down. I mean, it brought so many tears to my eyes. My husband's a little bit less emotional about things like that, but we raised our kids there. That was our first restaurant. That was our dream. Like we had, it was our starting point, and to close that down felt certainly like failure. Now, looking at it in hindsight, it's not necessarily failure. We were able to put something else in its place, but along the way, it was because we were able to buy that real estate is why we were able to open up a new place there. Because if we had to close down, it just would have been sheer failure, I think. But I do think failure looks different to people along the way.
Well, there's interesting thing about the business is that there's opportunity for failure every day, right? Because this is sort of a lot of times in the restaurant business, it's a little bit like one strike and you're out, like people, it seems like are very eager to give you a shot. And, but a lot of times if they don't love their experience, they're not coming back. And it seems like one of the most important things I would assume in your line of work is consistency across the board.
Yes. Restaurants in general are just one of the most unforgiving businesses out there. Yes, one small thing goes wrong and it can get totally blown out of proportion, but it just might be a rough day for them. They're having a hard time, or they wanted this to be really special, and we fell flat. And that is the worst feeling. We're always trying to, supersede what people are expecting, but it happens all the time. And we just have to keep getting up and keep trying again and keep trying to just, scoot things back in order and wake up the next day and do a better job. And a lot of the times it is like a little bit of a crisis management on a daily basis, because, if you read the shift notes of one of our restaurants, you'll see the next day, there is typically something. There's like, they'll write in, hey, these are the positive guest comments, and these were the negative things that happened. And there's often something, like someone didn't have a fork and they couldn't get one, and then they were upset about it. And that's so small. We can't forget the fork. Do you know what I mean? We have to set them up. And it can be just the tiniest things. So just trying to stay on all of that as best we can.
Well, you and Jeff are not from Charlotte, but when you came to Charlotte, you had some very Charlotte jobs. You worked at Lance, and he worked at Chip Ganassi Racing. And so you came to Charlotte and in really meaningful ways, I think, became immersed career-wise in something that was uniquely Charlotte. And here you are today with what you're doing, making Charlotte what it is in a really meaningful way. And I wonder what that's like for you, like how you see yourself becoming a Charlottean and how you see your endeavors becoming part of the fabric of Charlotte, and what you think Charlotte is.
I've listened to some of your podcasts and about this exact topic, and I've read some of the books and articles, and I do think we are at a time where we're trying to figure out what Charlotte is, but it is becoming itself every day that everybody is doing something unique. It really is. When we first started out, yes, I was at Lance Snack Foods. He's at Chip Ganassi Racing doing total Charlotte things. And I do find it very ironic that I'm still in food in a very different way, and he's still in hospitality in a very different way. But getting to build this city and just have a piece of that is like, it brings us a lot of joy. I mentioned how much, providing jobs is so joyful, but so is creating spaces that bring about joy and are a place where people can experience celebrations or memories or whatever it might be, where they can bring people together and have an enjoyable night. To us, food and culinary is a huge part of what makes Charlotte special and what will make Charlotte special in the future too. A lot of what Jeff and I are shifting to do is think about what can we do now to help chefs in the future be able to be set up to make great restaurants. We're lucky here in Charlotte where the CRVA, for instance, has invested in also in part with some other groups, bringing Michelin to this area. So now suddenly there are Michelin recommended restaurants, including 3 of our concepts in that guide. And, Charlotte is really coming about, and to have a piece of that, a part in that is just, it's a great honor. And I think one of the things that we can do is make sure that for many years to come, things like how can we partner better with farmers so that they can make it, and then chefs in the future have great farms to work with that are close by. And how can we make sure that we're always pushing the food scene forward by putting forth a really unique menu like we have at Leluia Hall. It's if you look at it, it is so nuanced and it is so unique. And there's so many little particularities of it that's really pushing things forward. And how do you transform old spaces and make them into something special to help create that fabric around Charlotte and give it that culinary culture that is pretty necessary these days for a city that's newer.
Well, speaking of what's coming in Charlotte, I hear that there's a place called Olivelli Deli, and it's your next thing. What's that about?
It's our next thing. So this is another example of, is it failure? Is it not? We opted in earlier this year to close down our donut shop, Raining Donuts, that we operated profitably for about 7 years. We closed it down in February, and we are working on this Italian deli concept. We are having a lot of fun with it. We're going to make homemade bread there. So there's kind of like Benny Seed Kaiser roll type rolls, and sourcing meats from Italy. We're bringing in Springer Mountain chicken. And I'm super excited about the menu. I think we've got some really unique touches on it so that they're not just like a ham and cheese sandwich type of thing. They're just really special and homemade. And it's just our little walk-up window where we had the donuts where people could order. But this will be for sandwiches and soft serve.
Well, you're in Noda, you're in Plaza Midwood, you're in historic Dilworth. Where else? Where else in Charlotte? Where are you gonna, or what might the future hold for your group?
The only other next thing that we've got another project that we're working on in Dilworth. That's the Leaper Wyatt building. That's a 1903 grocery store. So you can look for that coming in the next year or so. We're working on the build out. Hard and fast. But
you got the concept for that worked out yet?
So we do. It is a very unique space. So we moved 2 stories of this building, okay, and we sat it on top of a foundation. So currently there are 3 stories there, and then we're building a solarium on top. So it will be a 4-story building, which sounds huge, but it's not. It's 1,500 square feet on each floor, and then by the time you put in a staircase, an elevator, and bathrooms, it all gets eaten up very quickly. So we are coming up with a very unique concept where we'll have different menus on each floor. So there'll be different dining experiences on each one. So I'm super excited about it. It's going to be awesome. It's called Wyatt's Superfine. Wyatt being the name of the grocer who operated the store for 50 years. His name was Pleasant Wyatt. And then Superfine is actually a level of grain milling that you can bring grains down to make certain breads and pastas. So that'll be threaded into the menu as well. But the other upcoming project that we have is a commissary that we're working on. A commissary is something that for us means that we can make our operations a lot more efficient. So things like stocks and broths can be made there. Cocktail syrups, all of our butchery can be done there. We can make homemade burratas and pastas there in that one place and send them out to the restaurants. There's a lot of efficiencies there financially that we're hoping to achieve, but also we'll have a little shoppable market there as well, where people will be able to buy those goods and eat lunch or dinner right there and enjoy the fresh made food. And that's in South End.
You're very busy.
No.
Yeah.
We're all busy, aren't we?
You're very busy. You've been through a lot. There's a lot coming up. When you stop and reflect on where you are as a person and a business owner, how do you feel about where you've come and where you are and where it's headed?
I think the main word that comes to mind is grateful. I think what we've been through, both personally and also professionally, has just opened my eyes to seeing that life is, it's really what you make of it. And, there can be really tough times and you steer yourself in a certain way, or there can be really easy times and sometimes you end up in a hole after something like that. So it's really, whatever ends up coming our way, it's what we do with it. And I'm a big believer in having a vision, even if it's just a super positive vision. If you don't know exactly where you want to go, if it's a really positive vision of yourself and where you're headed, that you just kind of find your way towards that almost magnetically.
Jamie Brown, entrepreneur, restaurateur, author of 11 Tables. Thank you for being with me on the Charlotte Ledger podcast.
Thank you, Steve. Nice to be here.
That's it for today. Thanks for listening. This episode was produced by Lindsay Banks. You can find out more about the Charlotte Ledger by visiting thecharlotteledger.com.
This episode of the Charlotte Ledger podcast was presented by PBS Charlotte's Unspun program that tells you what politicians are often thinking but not saying.
QueenCityPodcastNetwork.com.